Colored folks think they can doctor? The scornful cry rang from the saloon porch, cutting into the heavy air of Dust Creek the day Eliza Carter set foot in town. The crooked wooden room given to her by the council, meant to be a place of healing, became a battlefield of spite. That afternoon, when a cowboy staggered through the door, blood running dark from his brow and dripping across the floorboards, the crowd pressed to the windows, waiting for her to fail. Yet each stitch sewn under the flicker of a kerosene lamp silenced the town. And then, from that very man, came the words that shook the air itself. "I'll be the first man you kiss, and the last to love you." Those words did more than restore Eliza's honor. They lit the spark of a love fierce enough to outlive every prejudice. See. Summer of 1879. Dust Creek lay like a furnace abandoned in the far west. The sun hung high, pouring its weight straight down, splitting wooden roofs so dry they looked ready to catch fire. A stagecoach from the east rattled into town. Iron wheels shrieked against gravel, a warning cry that strangers had come. Dust Creek had no welcome for outsiders, least of all for those it never asked for. The door swung open, and from it stepped a woman. Her dress, plain cloth worn thin, its hem stained with road dust, sleeves frayed from the long miles. In her hand she carried a heavy leather satchel, its strap carving red marks into her narrow wrist. Each step set the bag to clinking: scalpels, glass syringes, clamps, rolls of gauze. Her entire fortune, her only weapons for this hard land. Her name was Eliza Carter, a name Dust Creek had never heard, until the moment her brown feet touched the burning red earth and every eye in town fixed upon her. A man on the saloon rail squinted, spat into the dirt, and snorted. Cowboys lounging on the steps burst into mocking whistles as if welcoming a new game. A woman pulled her shawl lower, yet let her words fall sharp enough to be heard. "Lord above, the council's dragging in colored dolls now, just to play at being civilized?" Laughter broke loose, dry and jagged as the sun itself. The air around Eliza pressed close, as if 1,000 needles dug into her skin. She did not turn her head, did not speak. Her hand gripped the satchel strap until her knuckles whitened. That look of contempt, that scornful laughter, none of it was strange. It was the echo of Georgia, when she was 10, running with her mother down the main street, stopped short by a stranger's hiss. "Little nar girl, don't you dare hold your head high." The memory had never faded. Later, when she sought entrance to medical schools, her papers were returned unopened. Excuses came dressed in order. "We do not take women. We do not take colored. This place is not for you." Only when a women's training institute in Philadelphia opened its doors did she find a way in. Yet even there, each step down the hallway was met with stares, whispers sharp as knives. What would a doll know of anatomy? Who lets a woman put hands on blood and flesh? Eliza had lived under those words until her hands themselves proved otherwise. She memorized every page, burned nights away in the dissection room, stood steady under the frowns of professors and peers. She earned her certificate. She held it warm in her hand, only to find the world cold still. Hospitals, large towns, wealthy families, none would open their doors. So she chose Dust Creek. To the council, her presence was a piece of decoration, proof for speeches of progress. To herself, she knew it plain. This was the last chance. Without it, her life would stretch into nothing but refusals. Down the main street, red dust rising at her heels, each step struck the ground like defiance. Men on horseback towered past, their stares pressing down like weights. Women on porches clutched their baskets tighter, their eyes narrowing as if she were a jest brought to life. A few children peeked out from behind skirts, wide-eyed, not yet schooled in the art of disdain. Then a thick-bearded man leaned on the saloon post, his voice slurred from whiskey but sharp enough to cut. "A colored doctor. I'd sooner die than let her lay a knife on me." The crowd roared with laughter. It rolled through the forge, carried to the small wooden chapel where wind whistled through the cracks. In the burning air, that laughter cut like a cold blade straight to the ear. At the far end of the main street stood a weather-beaten shack, what the council dared to call a clinic. The roof sagged, the door leaned crooked, the planks were warped and scarred by years of sun and wind. Outside, a hastily painted board that read "Doctor" swung on its rope, taunting her with its mockery. Yet Eliza did not pause to measure what lay ahead. She knew the road would be long, dust-filled, and cruel, but it was the only road left. A whistle cut through the heavy noon air. From the saloon porch, a young cowboy, hat pulled low, curled his lip and let the words drag like spurs. "Colored thinks she can heal." The line of men along the railing burst into laughter. The sound rang hard against the anvil blows from the smithy, mingled with hoarse cries, carrying no disguise of contempt. A few women in front of the mercantile covered their mouths, pretending to pick over produce while smirking behind their hands. To Dust Creek, the arrival of a colored woman burdened with her satchel was nothing more than midday sport. Eliza did not stop. She did not turn. Her grip on the satchel strap bit deeper, nails pressing into worn leather. Each step drove firm into the red dust, lifting a haze around her faded hem. She let her footsteps answer. To bow or to speak would only feed them the weakness they craved. Then, in the midst of jeers, a flicker caught her eye. From the edge of the crowd, a boy of 9 or 10 slipped forward. His face was sun-browned, cheeks flushed with heat, blonde hair damp with sweat. In his small hand, he held a green-speckled apple, likely stolen from the grocer's bin. He glanced about, then stepped to the road's edge where Eliza was passing. He stretched out his hand. His wide eyes held no scorn, no doubt, only a clear gaze that seemed to say, "I believe you." Eliza froze. Her throat tightened. The apple shone red in the sun, small yet burning like a spark in a dark room. For a heartbeat, the laughter faded. Before her stood something untouched, a seed not yet poisoned by grown men's hate. She reached to take it, but a broad hand clamped the boy's shoulder, yanking him back. The apple slipped, rolling into the red dirt, lying still as witness to the moment. The man who stepped forward was tall, broad-shouldered, his black duster caked with dust, hat pulled low across his face. Branson Hale, richest rancher in the county. His name alone bent the town to heel. Tales of his cruelty carried across the plains. One look enough to cow a worker, one rap of his cane enough to break a debtor. Branson dragged the boy behind him, gripped so hard the child winced. His gray eyes cut across Eliza. He spoke no word, yet the contempt in his gaze weighed heavier than all the mocking laughter. That look pressed down, as though her very existence was an offense. Eliza stood still, hand still lifted, caught mid-air. She did not bow. She did not lower her gaze. She raised her chin and met him. For that instant, two worlds locked, wealth and power against the will of the despised. The boy was pulled away. But before the crowd swallowed him, he turned back. His eyes, bright with unshed tears, lingered on her. The apple lay where it had fallen, dust settling over its green skin. Eliza bent, lifted it, brushed it gently with her hem. She did not eat it, nor did she cast it aside. She held it tight, a silent sign that amid the jeers, there had been one gaze that was different, untouched by bitterness. Behind her, Dust Creek carried on with its noise. But within Eliza, another memory was fixed, the eyes of a child pulled away. In that gaze, a seed of faith had been sown, enough to tell her the long red road ahead was not without meaning. Late afternoons in Dust Creek carried a harsh gold light, beating down on wooden rooftops as if to set them ablaze. Red dust swirled with each lash of wind, seeping through cracks, settling over everything. Inside the shack the council dared call a clinic. Eliza Carter was rinsing her instruments in cheap whiskey. Her hands moved steady, each stroke deliberate, as though every cleansing were a reminder that her trade allowed no mistake, not even the smallest. The kerosene lamp on the table flickered with the draft slipping through the gaps. Eliza had grown used to the silence there, the rhythm of her own breath, the drip of liquor, the scratch of her pen. But that evening, the silence shattered. The door burst open. Hinges screamed, a gust of red dust sweeping in, scattering papers across the floor. Eliza looked up sharply. A tall figure filled the frame, staggering under the weight of each step. Cowboy Thomas McGraw. He crossed the threshold, broad shoulders slick with sweat and trail dust. Blood streamed down his brow, dark against his sun-browned face. His heavy boots dragged, leaving smears of red across the old wood. Each step threatened to fell him, yet his eyes, shadowed beneath thick brows, still burned with the pride of a man bred to saddle and storm, one who would not bow to pain. Behind him came 3, 4 cowboys, propping him up, laughing as they slung barbed words. Fall off a horse and thinks he's been shot. Brought him to the colored girl. She puts a knife to him. He's a goner. Best let her practice. Save us the trouble of burying him. Their laughter rattled the walls, turning the room itself into a stage for mockery. Outside, townsfolk gathered quick, pressing to the windows, eager for spectacle. In Dust Creek, little ever happened. A bloodied cowboy at the mercy of a colored doctor was more than entertainment. It was scandal. Eliza's gaze fixed on the gash across Thomas's brow. Blood fell in heavy drops, soaking his collar. Her hand trembled, then steadied. She set her forceps down, straightened, her voice cutting clear through the haze. Set him down. The room froze. Thomas's friends turned on her, sneers curling, before breaking into laughter. Did you hear? She's giving orders now. Go on then. We'll have a show tonight. They waited, for Thomas to laugh, to shrug her off. In that moment, Eliza knew the choice wasn't hers. It lay with the man standing bloodied before her. Thomas planted a wide hand on the table's edge, steadying himself. Blood spattered the surface, dark and spreading. He drew a breath, shoved his friend's hands away. His gray eyes locked on Eliza. His voice was hoarse from thirst, but struck clean as an axe on wood. Let her work. The air tightened. Outside, the whispers fell silent, replaced by a collective breath held. Faces hardened, lips curled, but no one moved to stop him. Eliza's chest constricted like rope pulling tight. Yet, her hands held steady. In Thomas's defiant gaze, she saw what Dust Creek had never given her, a true chance. She turned briskly to her table. Whiskey, clean cloth, needle, thread, each set in place. The lamp's glow kissed the point of the needle, gleaming bright. The sharp reek of spirits overpowered blood's iron tang. The room hushed, broken only by Thomas's rough breathing. His friends shifted aside, still muttering but unwilling to intervene. One drawled, "Let's see how long till he drops." But the words faded, drowned by the strange pull of the moment. A colored woman, alone, poised to put her hands on a white cowboy's wound. Eliza slipped on her cotton gloves, wiped blood from the gash. Thomas flinched, breath hissing through clenched teeth, but made no sound. She pressed a whiskey-soaked pad, the sting drawing another sharp breath, yet his eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling beams. "You need to lie down," she said evenly. Thomas gave no answer, only eased himself onto the long table by the window. The wood groaned under his weight. Their shadows stretched long across the wall in the jaundiced light. Eliza sat beside him, needle ready. Her hands shook a moment, then steadied as steel touched skin. The stitch slid through, thread pulled taut, tied fast. 1, 2, 3. The only sound, the whisper of needle through flesh, the faint rasp of thread. Outside, faces pressed to the glass, breath fogging panes. The laughter was gone. Even the whistles died. Thomas's jaw locked, fists clenched hard, sweat rolling with blood down his temple. But not a sound escaped him. His eyes held the rafters as if vowing that Dust Creek would never see him break. Eliza worked without falter. Left hand pinched the wound, right hand guided the stitch. Each one neat, straight, unerring. Her palms sweated within the gloves, yet the needle never slipped. The final knot tied, she cleaned the cut, wrapped the bandage snug. Drawing a deep breath, she said softly, but clear, "It's done." Thomas pushed himself upright, sway in his shoulders before he straightened. His gray eyes swept his friends. A hand touched the white bandage lightly, then he turned to them. "She saved my life." The words struck like hammer on iron. His friends faltered, glancing away. Outside, the crowd dropped their eyes, silence thick as dusk. No one dared laugh. Eliza pressed her hand to her lap, heart pounding off its rhythm. In that charged stillness, she knew. From this dust and blood-soaked evening forward, Dust Creek had changed. The room held its breath after Thomas's words. Outside, the gawkers no longer laughed, only cast uneasy glances at one another. Wind pushed through the cracks, dragging red dust across the floor, making the kerosene lamp tremble, casting long shadows of Eliza and Thomas on the wall. Eliza sat still for a moment, drawing deep breaths to steady herself. Sweat dampened her dress, gloves soaked through, but her pulse slowed again. She stripped the gloves, lifted a fresh cloth, and cleaned the wound once more, her eyes tracing every stitch to be sure no fault remained. Then something struck her. The cut was too clean. Not the ragged tear of a fall from a horse, not the jagged split of stone or branch. The edges were sharp, straight, deliberate, the work of a blade. Eliza had seen such cuts before, in anatomy lessons, in the slums of eastern cities where men were carved open in alleys, and she had heard whispers of the narrow daggers Branson Hale's men carried. A chill slid down her spine. Thomas sat upright, eyes on his friends. Eliza bent over her work, her hand stilled on the cloth. She said nothing, hiding the pause in her gaze. But in that moment she knew Something more than an accident had driven Thomas to her door. Yet she could not voice it, not with the town still watching, ready to pounce on the smallest misstep. She pressed the bloodied cloth into a pouch, sealing her doubt within it. Thomas touched the bandage, then looked at her. His gray eyes offered no explanation, no regret, only the calm of a man who had placed his trust in her hands. "You need rest," Eliza said softly, keeping her tone even. Thomas nodded. Then, turning to his companions lingering at the door, he spoke with iron. "You heard her. She's the doctor. If you don't trust her, find another to stitch your heads." They shifted awkwardly. One scratched his beard, another turned away. At last they moved to steady him, guiding him out step by step. When the door closed, noise rippled across the street, then faded like waves retreating. Eliza stood alone in the stench of whiskey and blood. She lowered the lamp near the stains on the floor, staring hard at the dark streaks. Memory returned of her days in Philadelphia. In the theater, her professor had shown them knife wounds, clean, straight, deliberate, just like Thomas's. He had sneered at her then. "No one will ever let someone like you touch a scalpel. But if they do, know the difference between accident and intent." Those words returned now, heavy as stone. Eliza rose, washed her instruments one by one. Scalpel glinted under the lamp, clamps, thread, forceps. Each clink rang hollow in the empty room. But when she reached the blood-soaked cloth, she lingered, staring at the deep red in its weave. "A blade," she whispered, voice rough. A gust slammed the shutters, rattling the window. Dust whirled inside, mingling with the iron scent of blood. Eliza shoved the cloth into a drawer, locked it, tight. She knew her suspicion was nothing without proof. And in Dust Creek, the word of a colored woman was worth less than a penny. She trimmed the lamp, its yellow light washing her tense face. Opening her ledger, she wrote in sharp strokes, "This evening, treated a cowboy named Thomas McGraw. Wound suggests knife, not fall. Unspoken, but not forgotten." Ink spread heavy. Eliza closed the book, her hand resting on the cover, silence pressing around her. Outside, hooves faded down the street. The crowd scattered. Only wind howled between the clapboard houses. Dust Creek slipped back into its weary quiet. But within Eliza, a storm had begun. She knew her presence was already a thorn in many eyes. Now, with this wound, she might have stumbled onto something darker. A truth Branson Hale and his men would bury in red dust before they let it surface. Eliza set down her pen, blew out the lamp. The room sank into shadow, silver moonlight spilling through the cracks, glinting on blood-stained boards. In that silence, she gripped the strap of her satchel. If she was to face a whole town, or the shadows lurking within it, she had only her hands and her knowledge. But tonight, she had learned something more. Dust Creek was not only a trial of prejudice. It was a battlefield where secrets hid beneath the red dust. Late afternoons in Dust Creek always bore a weight hard to name. Sunlight poured from the ridgetops, scorching streaks of gold down the main street, while red dust rose thick whenever hooves struck the ground. At the end of that street, in the small wooden shack called a clinic, Eliza Carter had grown used to the creak of the old door. Most days it meant a wary patient, or some curious soul wanting to see if the colored doctor was real. But lately, that sound had come to mean something else. The arrival of Cowboy Thomas McGraw. He came with the steady beat of hooves, the thud of heavy boots on the porch. Sometimes he carried a bundle of dry wood. sometimes a sack of flour set neatly on the table, as though such clumsy gifts were payment for her tending his wound. Eliza never asked, yet could not deny the stir within her whenever his frame filled the doorway. In that narrow room, the air seemed to change with him there. He often sat on the long bench by the window, where the light slanted through the boards. Faded shirt, sun-darkened face, gray eyes, quiet as stone. He let her strip the bandage, clean the wound, bind it fresh. His hands rested on his knees, still as rock, while she worked in silence. Yet Thomas never left in silence. After a time he would begin, voice low, words slow, telling some story from the range. One day it was cattle scattering at the scent of wolves, forcing the ranch awake all night. Another, a young horse breaking a water trough in its fight against a saddle. His tone was spare, but each tale carried a detail that pulled a laugh or a shake of Eliza's head. Once he spoke of crossing the creek near town, reins slipping from his grasp. The horse bolted, water spraying high. He lunged forward, catching the reins at the last breath, or else he'd have been dashed on the rocks. He paused then, admitting he had shaken all over afterward. Eliza arched a brow. "You know fear?" Thomas's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Any man who says he doesn't is lying. The only question is whether you let it ride you." That line followed Eliza into the night. By lamplight, she opened her ledger, hand trembling as she wrote. "This man sees fear as natural. I've let the weight of this town's prejudice ride me too long." Day after day, Thomas returned, sometimes only long enough for her to check the wound. Sometimes he lingered, leaning back against the wall, words trickling steady as a slow stream. And each time the heaviness that clung to Eliza since she set foot in Dust Creek seemed to ease. Of course, the town wasted no chance to gossip. They saw him step into her clinic, sit for hours, speaking and laughing with a colored doctor. Whispers spread quick. White cowboy keeping company with a black woman. Some said it was pity. Others, more venomous, claimed he did it to spite Branson Hale. Eliza heard it all. At the market, passing the saloon, the chuckles, the broken sentences that fell silent as she walked by. Each one cut thin as a blade. Yet somehow, whenever the door opened and Thomas appeared, the noise outside fell away. One evening after she finished changing his bandage, Thomas stayed, watching her fold cloths and thread with patient hands. At last his voice came low. "I once saw a doctor, praised by his whole town, shaking so bad he near dropped his needle. Steady hands save lives. Doesn't matter whose hands they are." Eliza faltered, heat rushing her cheeks. She bent over her medicine box, hiding the light in her eyes. Her reply was clipped. "You talk too much. Rest, so you heal faster." Thomas gave no argument, only a quiet smile as though he knew what she tried to hide. That night she wrote in her book, "Some footsteps at my door bring fear, yet I find myself waiting for them. They remind me I am not entirely alone." The page closed, but her heart opened a crack wider. Just enough for light to slip in, though outside, Dust Creek remained a town steeped in scorn. Rumors in Dust Creek spread faster than prairie wind. A glance on the street, a shadow lingering too long at the clinic door. By dusk, it turned into a tale, twisted and carried through every porch and shop front. Since Thomas McGraw's visits had become steady, whispers had swelled into waves. A white cowboy, keeping with a colored doctor. He's lost his mind. Or pity. Or worse, aiming to spite Branson Hale. They never spoke to Eliza's face, yet she heard them in the market, while weighing flour, while waiting at the counter. Voices died when she drew near, only to rise again when her back was turned. Eyes clung to her, pinning her against the boards of the town's judgment. One afternoon, she left the mercantile with a small basket, only to find a knot of women perched on the steps, heads bent as if adjusting hems, but their voices rang just clear enough. That clinic's nothing but a show. Soon enough, no one will come. Their giggles followed like pecking birds. Eliza bit her lip, quickened her pace. The basket handle cut her palm. Her mother's voice echoed in memory. Never let their words decide who you are. Yet here, every step felt loaded with the weight of scorn. Branson Hale himself, wealthiest rancher, his voice louder than the chapel bell, made no secret of his displeasure. Eliza had seen him on the street. A broad figure, long coat trailing dust, eyes sharp with frost. At his side, always the small boy, gaze clear and wandering, until Branson's rough hand yanked him forward, forbidding him to look elsewhere. That night, under a moon smothered by cloud, Dust Creek lay hushed. Eliza sat at her table, lamplight casting her slim shadow across the boards. Her pen marked down the case of a woman with a broken arm. Outside, the wind carried the dry tang of earth. Then it came. A shatter that ripped the silence. Glass sprayed across the floor, glittering in the lamplight. A stone rolled to rest at her feet. Eliza leapt up, heart knotted. She flung open the door, the hinges crying. Dust still hung in the air, stirred by a night gust. In the yard, a small figure froze, eyes wide with terror. A boy. Hair tangled, hands dirty, trembling. She knew him, the son of Branson Hale. He stood trapped in her gaze, tears streaking his dusty cheeks. For a moment, Eliza saw herself at 10, driven from the main street, condemned for nothing but running with her head held high. Her chest tightened, but her voice stayed calm. Why did you do this? The boy swallowed, shoulders shaking. At last his words spilled with sobs. Father made me. He said, I had to scare you off, but I don't want you to go. You're a real doctor. I know you are. Tears rolled, mixing with red dust. His young eyes held no scorn, only a fragile truth that struck deep. Eliza bent slowly. On her table, she still kept the tiny apple, the first gift he had dared slip into her hand amidst the town's jeers. She picked it, up now, placed it in his shaking palm. The apple had shriveled, its skin wrinkled, yet it weighed like a vow. I remember your kindness, she whispered. Her eyes held his. Don't let anyone take it from you. The boy clutched the apple, nodding hard, tears flowing. Then, startled, he turned and fled toward the street's end. There, waiting, stood Branson Hale. His hand clamped the boy's shoulder, dragging him away into the dark. Their figures vanished into night. Eliza remained on the porch, wind cutting sharp, red dust streaming down the empty road. Her hand still felt the apple's weight. Fear pricked her, but beneath it glowed a quiet faith. Even if the town rose against her, one clear gaze had chosen to believe. She stepped inside, gathered shards of glass. Blood welled where edges sliced her skin, but she uttered no sound. She placed the pieces in a wooden box, keeping them as proof of the night when hatred struck, and a child's fragile goodness shone. On a new page she wrote, Tonight they cast stones to drive me out, but in the broken glass, An eye of trust planted a seed. That seed will live, even if it must grow in dust and storm. Outside, Dust Creek lay still. Within the shack, lamplight burned steady, a beacon against the dark. Darkness pressed down on Dust Creek like a damp blanket. The moon hid behind thick clouds, its weak glow unable to scatter the black that smothered the gray clapboard houses. The main street lay silent, broken only by wind scraping tin roofs and a dog barking somewhere out on the flats. At the small clinic at the street's end, a lamp flickered, throwing Eliza Carter's shadow across stained walls. She bent over her ledger, writing steady lines, a reminder to herself that no matter the suspicion in town, there were still hands that needed her. A pounding on the door broke the stillness, urgent, frantic. Before she reached it, the door swung wide. A thin woman staggered in, clutching a boy of 8. His body shook, burning hot, lips tinged blue. His eyes were shut tight, breath ragged, limbs jerking like a fish gasping on dry rock. "Doctor, please, save my boy." The mother's voice cracked in desperation. Eliza pulled a blanket onto the table, laid the child down. Her palm touched his brow. Heat seared into her skin. Her heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "How long?" she asked. "This afternoon it began. By night he seized again and again. I feared he would—" The woman's words collapsed into sobs. Eliza wasted no breath. She opened her satchel, drew out her one-glass syringe and the vial of morphine she had carried from the east. Her hand trembled for a heartbeat, then steadied. Under the lamp, the needle flashed bright. The mother shrank back, voice shaking. "Is it safe?" Eliza met her eyes firm. "If not, he will not live through this night." The answer stilled the woman. She nodded, tears spilling. Eliza sterilized the needle, measured the dose, recalling countless hours in Philadelphia wards. But here no professor watched, only a child balanced at the edge of death. She drew a breath, slid the needle into the frail arm. The boy jolted. Then slowly his breath eased, the seizures stilled. She pressed a cool cloth to his brow, wringing and changing it again and again, wiping sweat as it poured, working his limbs to keep his blood moving. His breathing steadied, though faint. The mother knelt close, fists clutching her dress white. She whispered prayers in broken gasps. "Lord, don't take him from me." Eliza did not answer. Tonight it was her hands alone that held him to life. Every lesson, every sleepless night in training, now her only weapon. Time dragged. Wind rattled the door. Each tremor in the boy's frame pulled her heart taut. She worked on, cloth, pulse, breath, each motion warding off death itself. Near midnight, his pulse slowed to steadier beats, lips softening back to pink. His breath smoothed. Eliza straightened, drawing a long breath, her gloves soaked in sweat. Relief flickered through her chest. The mother saw it, broke into tears, clutching Eliza's hand hard. Thank you, doctor. You were here when no one else was. Without you, I would have lost him." In those tear-filled eyes, Eliza saw what she had long craved since stepping into Dust Creek. Trust. Not suspicion, not jeers, but true faith from a mother pulled back from despair. Eliza nodded, hiding the tremor in her mouth. "He'll need rest, water, days of care, but tonight, he has passed through." The mother wept again, kissed the boy's damp hair, then looked at Eliza once more. They may say what they will, but I know you saved my child. I will never forget. By dawn, she led her son home. Their shapes faded down the dew-soaked street. Eliza stood in the doorway, wind cold through her hair, yet a quiet warmth stirred within. She turned back inside. The box still held the shards of glass from the stone-throwing night. But beside them now lived a new memory, a hand gripping hers, a mother's voice breaking in gratitude. She opened her ledger and wrote, "Tonight, a small life was held, and in a mother's eyes, I saw trust. Perhaps that is the truest cure for the wounds I carry." Outside, dawn thinned the mist, pale light spilling through. The little wooden room, poor as it was, glowed with a truth none could deny. Eliza Carter, a colored doctor, had saved a child in Dust Creek. Dawn broke over Dust Creek without peace. The sun had barely risen past the ridge, its pale light not yet strong enough to dry the thin mist on the street, when whispers already thundered through town. From the saloon to the smithy, from the chapel to the market, the story spread quicker than prairie fire. The colored doctor poisoned a child. Branson Hale, the richest rancher, the man whose word carried more weight than law, had planted the seed. His voice had poured into ears the night before, and by morning it had sprouted into a crooked truth. No one remembered exactly what he had said, only that the tale now carried sharp edges, strange injections, experiments on children's flesh. The town's old fears of outsiders, of difference, of a challenge to their order, were set ablaze. When Eliza Carter opened the clinic door, the cold morning air rushed in with mutters steeped in malice. A crowd had already gathered, circling the porch. Men stood with arms crossed, eyes hard. Women whispered behind shawls. Children clung to skirts, their eyes bright with curiosity, waiting for a show. A big man stepped forward, fist pounding on the doorframe, voice booming. "We want answers. That boy near died, and she dares call herself a doctor?" Shouts rose in answer. "That's right. Drive her out before more lives are lost." Eliza stood in the doorway. Her hand tightened on the strap of her satchel, though her voice caught in her throat. Dozens of faces glared at her like jurors ready with their sentence. Her heart hammered, yet her eyes stayed steady, refusing to show her fear. Then came the sound of hooves, pounding like war drums. Red dust split the crowd as Thomas McGraw rode in, tall on his horse, shirt faded, the wind snapping at his sleeves. He reined in before the porch, swung down, boots striking the ground with a heavy thud. His gaze swept the crowd, cold, then fixed on Eliza. His voice rang deep, solid as stone. "Last night I was there. I saw that boy seizing with my own eyes, and it was these hands that kept him alive till dawn." The crowd stirred, but anger still boiled. A man shouted back, "Why defend her? Want to make a fool of yourself, Thomas?" Another spat. "He's bewitched. We don't need strangers bringing poison here." Eliza looked around. Faces already hostile now darkened further. She knew Thomas was gambling. In a town where Branson's word passed for law, to stand with her was to draw a blade against himself. Thomas stepped closer, facing the crowd. His voice cracked like a whip. "Any of you with a sick child or a wound needing stitches, will you hand them to Branson Hale or to Eliza Carter? Say it plain. Now." The words fell heavy, silencing the square. Eyes shifted. A young mother bent her head, clutching her child tighter, recalling too clearly her own fear. but the silence broke. Branson Hale strode from the porch across the street, cane tapping, his wide frame casting a long shadow. His eyes gleamed with calculation, his voice smooth as venom. "Folks just want peace, McGraw. A real doctor brings safety, but an experiment dressed up as one puts us all at risk." Murmurs rose again. Some nodded. Others looked at Eliza with fear and disdain. Sweat trickled down her back. Old memories pressed in. Being called a doll, being turned away from hospitals, being told she would never be trusted with a scalpel. Now all those wounds gathered in one crushing weight. Thomas cut him off, stepping forward, voice iron. "Truth doesn't hide behind money. Truth saves lives. I know last night she saved one. That's the only truth worth standing on." His words struck like hammer blows. The hecklers faltered, uneasy. Some looked down, some looked away. Yet Branson did not yield. He slammed his cane to the dirt, eyes sparking fire. The air stretched taut, ready to snap. A gust swept the street, red dust rising to veil the faces. Eliza stood in the doorway, chest pounding, eyes fixed on Thomas. In his stance she saw something unmovable, a shield against the storm. The crowd lingered, torn between Branson's shadow and the truth spoken aloud. And in that wavering, Eliza's faith trembled, but held. Branson turned away at last, voice dripping like cold iron. "One day, the truth will show itself, and when it does, she'll have nowhere left to hide." The crowd dispersed, slow and restless, leaving dust to settle. Hooves clattered away. On the porch, Eliza gripped her satchel strap until her knuckles whitened. Thomas turned, his gray eyes calm, unshaken. "Don't let their words move you. You know what you've done." Eliza could not speak past the tightness in her throat. She only nodded, tears brimming. For in the storm of slander, it was his voice that kept her standing, if only for one more day. In Dust Creek, rumors needed no wind to travel. After the clash at the clinic door, the talk did not die down. It sharpened. No longer whispered in the market or muttered in the saloon. Words were hurled like iron thorns, straight into Eliza Carter's face whenever she passed. Poisoning children and still dares hold her head high. God save us, the town's turned into her testing ground. A burden sent by the council, nothing more. At first she tried to feign deafness, but each day the barbs dug deeper. The wary glances of those who once sought her help grew heavy as stone. Patience thinned. The wooden bed that had held the sick through many nights now stood bare and cold. That afternoon, prairie winds howled through town, heavy with dust and storm scent. Eliza sat motionless at her desk, ledger open, pen fallen from her hand. Tears slipped onto the page, blurring the lines. Every stitch she had made, every sleepless night, ground to dust beneath unseen accusations. Outside, the sky roiled dark, clouds curling like waves of coal. Wind screamed through the cracks, rattling the shack till its rafters groaned. The storm's howl fused with old memories, mocking laughter from her childhood, jeers that had stalked her steps since girlhood. Past and present pressed together, a weight that threatened to crush her. She buried her face in her arms, shoulders shaking. For once her back, always held straight, bent. Calloused hands cradled her head like that of a lost child. She reached for her old notebook, the one that steadied her with case notes and memories of survival. Tonight, its page blurred with tears. Her hand shook as she wrote, "Even strength has its limits." Perhaps I should leave. Perhaps Dust Creek will never accept me. The oil lamp sputtered, its flame weak as her hope. A gust flung the shutters wide, rain lashing her face. She did not rise to shut it. She let the storm swallow the room, just as the town seemed to swallow her dream of doctoring. That night, the storm's roar mingled with the muffled sobs she held inside. No knock came at the door. No patient sought her out. Only wind raged, long and merciless, like endless mockery. By dawn, the storm had passed. The main street lay slick with mud, tin roofing torn loose. Townsfolk clustered at the market, their tongues still wagging about the colored woman in the clinic. None noticed Eliza step onto her porch, eyes shadowed from a sleepless night, fists clenched white. Then hoofbeats rang clear across the morning, firm and unyielding. All eyes turned to the red-dusted road. A woman rode into town, straight-backed, her riding dress streaked with mud, her sun-darkened face lit with fierce resolve. In front of her, nestled tight, sat a small boy, Eliza's fever patient, and the woman was none other than Branson Hale's former wife, the boy's mother. The crowd fell silent. She reined in at the square, her voice cutting strong and sure. I was there that night. I saw it with my own eyes. Those hands saved my boy's life. If that is called a crime, then Dust Creek has never known a true doctor. Her words struck like thunder. Jeers vanished, feet stilled, eyes darted between Branson and Eliza. From across the street, Branson emerged, face pale beneath his scowl. He tried to stand firm, but his eyes betrayed unease. For the first time, the weight of his power, long unquestioned, wavered. Eliza stood on her porch, chest tight. Tears welled, not from shame this time, but from truth finally spoken aloud. A voice strong enough to tear through the veil of prejudice. The crowd did not cheer. They did not clap. But their silence was different now. It was the silence of people who no longer dared deny. Eliza gripped her notebook, feeling last night's desperate words pressed in ink. Perhaps I should leave. That question was answered, not by her, but by the truth the whole town had seen. And in that moment, among the storm's wreckage, Eliza Carter knew she had not lost. For the first time, it was Branson Hale who bowed his head, in silence. The storm had not passed. Black clouds still rolled over the sky. Wind shrieked through the gaps, and rain battered the windows of the small clinic. The oil lamp wavered, its thin flame casting warped shadows that crawled along the walls like restless ghosts. Eliza Carter sat motionless at the desk, shoulders trembling. The morning's ordeal, Branson's accusations, the crowd's judgment, the lone, defiant voice of the woman who stood for her, still rang in her ears. Weariness pulled at her like a whirlpool. She had lived with resistance for years, but never had the weight of a whole town pressed so mercilessly upon her. Hoofbeats cut through the storm. Eliza's head lifted, startled. The clinic door swung open, wind scattering her papers. Through the gust stepped a tall figure, soaked through, Thomas McGraw. His hair clung to his brow, shirt plastered to his frame, boots leaving mud across the floor. Water streamed from his clothes, yet his gray eyes burned bright, fire against the storm. Thomas, her voice cracked, half astonishment, half a sigh. Why would you come now? It's dangerous. He closed the distance, calloused hand pressing gently over her trembling one. The touch was firm, steady, warmer than any flame. You are not small, Eliza, his voice rumbled, drowning the storm outside. You've held life in your hands while this town slept. You've done what no one else dared. Her lips trembled, fighting tears. Fear, shame, exhaustion, all receded beneath the weight of his words. Yet her heart cracked open under them. You don't understand, she whispered. Every day they tell me I'm unworthy, a jest, a mistake. Even strong as I try to be, I've never felt more alone. Thomas's grip tightened, his gaze unyielding. No, you are not alone. Because I've chosen to stand with you, no matter what this town says. The storm faded from her ears. Only his eyes remained, a light in the wavering glow. He bent closer, voice rough, words driving straight into her soul. If you'll let me, I'll be the first man you kiss, and the last to love you. Eliza gasped. The walls she had built, the defenses forged from years of scorn, collapsed in that moment. His hand rose, brushing her cheek, rough fingers tender, as though cradling something precious. She closed her eyes. His lips met hers in a kiss, light as a vow yet strong enough to turn the world. It was not hurried, not fierce. It was fragile, trembling, yet within it lay a promise unbroken. A mark etched against the storm that amid wind and judgment, two souls had found each other. Eliza shivered in his arms, her hand pressed against his chest, feeling the heartbeat pounding beneath his rain-soaked shirt. Its warmth spread into her, melting the frost that had bound her heart for so long. The lamp flame flickered, painting their faces in gold as their breaths mingled. Thunder split the sky, rain lashed harder, but in the small room there was only a sweet stillness. They parted, foreheads resting together, breath ragged. Eliza laughed softly through her tears. You're mad, Thomas McGraw. Do you know what they'll say? Thomas smiled, weary but resolute. Let them. They've spoken long enough. This time I'll speak for myself, and I will not regret it. Eliza met his eyes, no longer hiding her own. For the first time her heart whispered, perhaps I am not alone after all. The storm raged on outside, but within the wooden walls a new fire had been lit, the fire of trust, of love born in defiance. And Eliza Carter knew that from this night on, no storm, no slander would ever be hers to face alone. Rumors of the kiss in the storm needed no witness. In a place like Dust Creek, where even the smallest glance could grow into a tale by nightfall at the saloon, a brush of lips was enough to spread like fire through dry grass. By the next day, whispers were already alive in the market, on front porches, even in the chapel. A white cowboy with the colored doctor. Some scoffed, claiming Thomas McGraw had lost his wits. Others sneered that Eliza Carter had brought ruin on herself. Yet beneath the mockery, there lingered silences, unreadable looks, and silence often weighed heavier than scorn. Branson Hale, of course, did not let it rest. The wealthy rancher, long treating Dust Creek as his private ground, bristled at the thought. Talk of Eliza and Thomas stoked his fury, and he struck back with words sharp as his cane. In the saloon he slammed the floorboards, growling, "To let the likes of her stand in this town is shame for us all." His men roared with laughter, fanning the flames, but not all nodded along. One morning, an old cowhand, his arm still bearing the scar from where Eliza had stitched him after a rope snapped, stepped out before the crowd gathering near the clinic. He raised his hand, voice gravelly. "If not for her, I'd be useless now. You all can jeer, but I know who kept me working." The square fell silent. None answered. Another day, old Mrs. Peterson, once writhing night after night with an abscessed tooth, hobbled forward on her cane. Facing Branson directly, she said, steady as stone, "I suffered till I could not eat. No one helped me. Only that doctor pulled the pain out and let me take a spoon of broth again. Which of you did that?" Again, the whispers died. Then came the boy, the one who had burned with fever, saved on a storm-swept night. He stood behind his mother, shy, eyes shining. His small voice stammered, "Doctor saved me." His mother's hand gripped his shoulder, her eyes wet as she nodded. That simple truth cut sharper than any speech. Eliza said nothing through it all. From inside the window, her fingers clutched the curtain as each word reached her. Her chest ached, pain, because no one should have to defend her right to heal. Warmth, because for the first time in Dust Creek, voices were not all against her. And through it all, Thomas stood on the porch. He was a wall, broad, steady, unshaken. His gray eyes swept the crowd, needing no gun, no threat. His presence alone silenced the loudest mouths. One evening, Branson sought open confrontation. He strode into the main street, cane striking dirt, his frame heavy against the glow of sunset. His voice thundered with both fury and disdain. "McGraw, you shame your bloodline standing beside a colored doctor. White women are plenty, yet you choose her. The whole town laughs at you." The air drew tight. Dust Creek held its breath. Thomas stepped down from the porch, slow but firm. He did not draw a weapon, nor raise his voice. He faced Branson Square, words even but hard as iron. "Shame isn't standing with someone you trust. Shame is living your life by grinding others down." The words fell like a hammer. The crowd froze. Some looked away, lips pressed tight. Others scratched at their necks, too wary to speak. Even Branson faltered. He slammed his cane into the dirt, teeth clenched, then turned back, his glare unable to hide defeat. Inside the clinic, Eliza heard every word. Her throat closed tight. For years, she had taught herself not to let others define her worth. But never had anyone stood before the town and declared it aloud. That evening, when the crowd had drifted home, she stepped onto the porch. Thomas remained, arms crossed, watching the horizon burn red. She longed to speak, to thank him, to confess, but no words came. Instead, she stood beside him, letting the wind lift her skirt hem, letting the red dust settle over them both. No words were needed. Their silence spoke enough. By the next spring, Dust Creek bore little resemblance to the town that had weathered the long, bitter winter. The sky stretched wide and blue, swallowing the small settlement whole. Grass rolled green across the fields, wildflowers flared bright, white butterflies lifted with the wind. The chapel bell rang far and clear, its tone washing away the hardness that had once clung to the place. Inside the plain wooden chapel, morning light spilled through the narrow windows, dust shimmering in the beams. There were no roses shipped from the east, no grand music. Only the rough voices of a few women singing, the thin, true notes of a boy's harmonica. Eliza Carter stood in the aisle, dressed in a simple white gown stitched by Mrs. Peterson and a handful of townswomen. No lace, no veil trailing behind her, but every thread was proof of quiet acceptance. Her hair was pinned neat. Her hands cradled a clutch of wildflowers gathered from the creek that morning. Purple, yellow, white. imperfect yet honest. At the altar waited Thomas McGraw, tall, steady, his gray eyes lit as though holding spring itself. When Eliza walked the wooden floor toward him, whispers faded, gazes melted away. For that moment, there was only the path between them. Some lips still pressed thin with disapproval, as cold as the day she first arrived. Yet there were also nods, small smiles. Mrs. Peterson wept openly. The mother whose boy had burned with fever held her son close, whispering, "That is the woman who saved you." At the chapel door lingered another figure, the boy Branson Hale once dragged by the shoulder, no longer trembling, no longer hiding. His eyes now held a quiet respect, a hard-won understanding. The minister's voice quavered but held true. "Do you vow to take his hand, through storm and stillness alike?" Eliza lifted her face, eyes bright. "I do." "And you, Thomas McGraw, do you vow to walk beside her, to trust this love as you trust your own breath?" Thomas's voice was deep, unshaken. "I do." When their lips met, silence claimed the room. A cough from the back, a shuffle of boots. None of it could touch the truth that stood in the open. In the heart of a prejudiced town, love had claimed its place. After the wedding, Eliza did not choose ease. The clinic grew, an added room, new tables, books copied by hand from her days in Philadelphia. She began teaching a handful of young women how to bind wounds, use herbs for fever, write simple prescriptions. At first, curiosity brought them. In time, they returned with purpose. For Eliza, it was not just teaching, it was planting seeds of freedom, seeds that might take root in any heart daring to hope beyond its chains. Thomas, when his work at the ranch allowed, often sat on the clinic steps come evening. Sweat still marked his shirt, yet his gaze was always calm as he watched the red horizon fall over Dust Creek. He let Eliza work, let the girls ask their questions. His presence alone became part of the new picture, a man choosing to stand beside, not above. The town still talked, some in scorn, some in admiration. Yet with the years, the phrase, "the white cowboy and the colored doctor," shifted. No longer mockery, it became proof that in a red dust town, love could break walls and trust could still the tongues of mockers. One quiet afternoon, Eliza sat at her familiar desk, lamplight spilling over worn pages. She opened the notebook she had carried since her first day in Dust Creek. On a fresh page she wrote, hand trembling yet proud, "A colored woman has the right to love and be loved, wholly for life, and that is the legacy I leave." Thomas entered, bringing the scent of horse and hay. He glanced at the words, said nothing, only smiled and pressed a kiss to her brow. Outside, the spring wind lifted red dust across the street. Inside, peace had set its roots. The faint echo of hooves in the distance rang like a song without end, a song of two souls who chose to stand together against the world. And in the years to come, when age dulled the noise of life, what would remain were the quiet moments, a hand clasped in the storm, an unwavering gaze when the town turned away. The story of Eliza and Thomas was not only a Wild West romance, but proof that courage and faith could make the impossible real. Perhaps you too have faced such a choice, holding tight to someone's hand despite the crowd's disapproval. Or perhaps you still remember the first glance that made you believe love was true. Share that memory below, for sometimes a single story is enough to warm another heart. If this tale touched you, press like, subscribe, and join us again on another quiet evening, where Wild West love stories still whisper, reminding us that love and kindness never fade.